You guys, welcome back to Pistons Talk Podcast. Hope you guys are having a great weekend so far. We're joined again. Feel like I have to have you on once a month just to catch up. We got Zariq in the building from Real Volleyball. What's going on, man?
Not much. Actually, a lot. I don't know why I said that. Not a lot is happening. That's my default. Um, Busy with all Pistons coverage, cruise coverage, and then it's final season for me right now. So I'm in hell right now. I was literally doing a paper right before we started recording today. So it's been a busy stretch for me, but I think busy is good. So I can't complain too much.
Well, maybe we can take your mind off finals and everything this week. Well, we could talk about some Detroit Pistons stuff, NBA
Yep.
trade rumors, all that good stuff. It's going to be a really good show, you guys. A lot that happened this past week in just the NBA world and the Piston world as well. And I want to start off with just like your overall thoughts with this week. I don't know how much you were able to catch the games, as you mentioned finals week. But over just, three games this week, what did you like? What did you dislike?
It's such a roller coaster because this team is it's in this weird state right now where they're competitive, but I think if there's a wall to be hit, they've hit that wall pretty hard on the season. And it was right around when they were hovering over 500 when I feel like they really hit that wall. That Chicago game was a game that really could have changed the early trajectory, of this season, and they really struggled early on. Vucevic, I felt it in my bones. I was like, this is gonna be a 30-point game from him at least. It was 29, but still, he killed them, and that's kind of been the thing for them. Is like a lot of times I'll tweet about the game because I have some written stuff coming, and then I've started doing a couple of videos here and there. But I I tweet about the team as part of my coverage, and I remember the Chicago game. They were like, "Well, what can you do?" Like I see a lot of fans who are like, "Oh, well, what can you do?" Like the Levine catches fire, and there's teams don't hit that many 3 pointers. And then I feel like I've heard that same comment at least 3 or 4 times since. Um, the Milwaukee game comes to mind, right? Where I think there was a point in the game, like in the third quarter, where Milwaukee was shooting 70% from three. And yes, teams normally don't shoot like that. But also, when it becomes this much of a commonality, that means that your defense has an issue. It's not just that teams all of a sudden catch fire against the Detroit Pistons and it's complete coincidence, because it's not. The perimeter defense on this team has taken a hit. I think the last time I was on this podcast, the defense was looking a little more promising. I want to say that was around the time where they were sixth or seventh in defensive rating. I would say, um, and it's just a thing where, yes, the effort I think has been an issue lately. Obviously excluding the New York game, but I feel like defense is, this is something Trajan said on his introductory press conference, was like, it's all about effort when it comes to defense. And, when he went about the way he approached doing this roster is like, it's got to be effort, because it's not a lot of defensively talented players on this team, and that's not a shot. That's just objectively true. Like, your true defenders on this team are Asar Thompson, Isaiah Stewart, and you could make an argument for Ron Holland, but he's so young at this point. Like, you can't expect him to be a all world defender year one. Like Asar Thompson being that kind of last year was a complete anomaly. So it's just they've hit a weird spot on the season of figuring out their identity, and how they navigate kind of teams starting to figure them out a little bit more. I thought the New York game was a great bounce back game. They really needed a win like that, because so far the games that they've won for the most part are games they should have won. Like
Mhm.
there have been a few games that they should have won that they lost, and then there were a few games that they shouldn't have won that they came close. But I think that New York game is the first time this season where I can say they really upset a team. The Lakers game, I think, is the closest thing to it since, but this Lakers team also is like pretty inconsistent. So they haven't really taken down like a juggernaut so far. And I would say that the Knicks, although like their record isn't, as good as like a Cleveland or a Boston. They're still really good. And I think on paper, you could make an argument that they're the best team in the East on paper. Um, so the fact that they were able to take them down, I know they were missing Cat, but the fact that they were able to take a team down like that, with Cade having as good of a game as he did, I think that shows progress. And I think that also shows that they're overcoming a little bit, which is a good sign.
Yeah, I thought this week, I know you had touched on it with the Bucks game, and love the video that you put out. There was so much coverage with the in-season tournament and how important of a game this could be for a young, up-and-coming, rebuilding team. And um, I felt it from the fans. They were very, very disappointed with the outcome of that in-season tournament, and it was kind of like a gut punch. In my opinion, especially the way the game not only was officiated at times, but to your point, like they shot 70% from three because their perimeter defense is just god awful. Like there's no way to kind of sugarcoat it. Like throughout 25 games, it's been really, really bad. Like we just don't close out on 3-point shooters, and it's kind of been a common theme. Like the Boston game, I think they hit 17 threes on Wednesday. But I think overall, going 1-2 when most of people, because I put out like little graphics saying like how many games you think the Pistons should win this week. A lot of people are saying 0-3. The fact that you went into New York and beat them the way you beat them, I thought that was a really big statement game for Cade Cunningham too. Like, especially when you have All-Star voting coming up in a couple of weeks. I thought that was such a great game from him. That Pacers game last week and then that Knicks game, you're starting to see a different Cade Cunningham that you haven't seen in previous years. You're starting to see him be a true leader and saying like, we got to go in and just kick them in the mouth before they kick us in the mouth, basically. And I'm really happy that, he had that type of game, first Piston ever to have a triple-double inside MSG. Like, I'm kind of surprised Grant Hill or Isaiah Thomas never did that. But overall, I was kind of pleased with the games. Didn't really expect them to go 3-0. The fact that they, kind of split the week 1 and 2, I'll take it.
Yeah, I mean, honestly, like record-wise, this week is not bad for them at all. I think last week was the week where you wanted to see a little more progress, and obviously that Milwaukee game was one that they definitely needed to win. And that was part of the video I put out was, how important, that game, winning that game would be like, it would have been genuinely like not only season altering, but also just altering kind of the perspective most people have on this team. If you're a diehard NBA fan and you watch most games, you can probably identify that this team has taken a step this season, and they're a competitive young team. But for the most part, if you're a casual NBA viewer, you associate the Detroit Pistons with either being mid or being last year's horrible, like Wingstop advertisement Pistons, right? Like that's the team that people really associate this the Cade Cunninghams of the world with, right? I feel like if they were to have made that in-season tournament run, gone farther, I think that would have, not saying that would have just changed everything overnight, but I think that that's the start of, really cementing that type of change. And not saying it can't happen because, there's an entire season to go. But I think that would have been a really good step for them. And I think, yes, playing in a very important competitive game like that did mean something, but winning those games means a whole lot more. And I think that has to be, an emphasis going forward, because I saw some quotes that said like, oh, like we were proud that, we played an important game like this. And true, that's valid. And, it was an important game, but the thing about important games is you got to win them. And moving forward, that's something that, I really want to see is, how they approach meaningful games, because if the season keeps going, even on the pace it's going right now, the Detroit Pistons at the end of the season will probably be fighting for a play-in spot, most likely. And that's not just, cope or, like just optimistically speaking, like realistically, they should be fighting for a play-in spot by the end of the season, which means They have more meaningful games ahead of them. How do they approach them, and how do you get it to not go like how the game went against Milwaukee moving forward? And I think Cade's a huge part of that. I think the progress he's shown is more than what you could have expected this season. Because like he already was very good last year. It's just the team around him wasn't. He's shown progress in terms of being able to take over games, and I think that's really important. But I also need to see it in an important game. I thought the Milwaukee game, he did what he could, obviously, but from the early on, it wasn't evident that that was a game he was going to take over. And in games like that, with the way this roster is constructed, yes, he does not need to be relied on for every single bucket they get anymore, but he is still the number one piece on this team. Like with Cade having a great night, you get nights like last night against New York, right? Games where he doesn't is how you get a Milwaukee game, where that's how you get when the Boston game, right? Like it's I guess the Boston game he had a good game, but in general, like if it's not early, you're setting yourself up for failure. So it's a tough position for him to be in, but he's got to kind of find that lane.
Yeah, I agree. We were talking yesterday when we did our post game podcast of that was probably a top 3 Cade Cunningham performance. And off the top of my head, I thought of the Atlanta Hawks game. I thought that was a game where he was really facilitating, being a floor general. The Pacers game, and then the Knicks game. I think he's had 3 performances in the first 25 games where I could tell you what's just like, maybe you talk to a casual fan saying like, give me a game to watch where, Cade Cunningham is just dominating on both ends of the court. And those are the 3 games that I thought of right at the top of my head personally.
Yeah, I mean that's that. I would probably have the exact same. It's when he's having a game like that. In my opinion, he is probably like one of the top 3, top 5 players to watch in the league. Because when he's having a game like New York, there's not a lot of players that can kind of replicate that type of game. And that really just goes to show the potential that he has, and what this front office decides to do with that type of talent is to be seen.
Well, we're going to get into that with our next segment. So, good people over at Bleacher Report, they always write very entertaining articles, I would say. And they had 3 dream scenario targets for your Detroit Pistons. And those 3 targets were Brandon Ingram, Dennis Schroeder, and Malcolm Brogdon. So I want to ask you, Zar, out of those 3, which one intrigues you the most?
I would have to go Brandon Ingram. And unfortunate saying that now, as he just suffered an ankle sprain, but I look at Malcolm Brogdon, I look at Dennis Schroeder, and those are 2 pieces that could definitely help this team objectively. They need help in the turnover department still. That's still an issue for them. Malcolm Brogdon is a vet who knows how to take care of the ball and is also really respectable on defense, while Dennis Schroeder provides more of an offensive punch while still being a respectable defender. But to me, I think the Pistons are at a crossroads right now. I feel as if this is a team that, as currently constructed, is meant to be competitive, which is good. That's progress. But this is a team that has an emerging superstar in Cade Cunningham. And I don't say that word lightly. Like I genuinely do believe Cade Cunningham is becoming a superstar in front of our eyes. It's what you do with that, right? And it's just kind of the way the NBA is. Yes, you can rely on internal development, and trading for a second star isn't always throwing in all your chips. I mean, the Pistons have so many young chips at this point, like it would be impossible to trade all of them away for one player, just also with the way the CBA is constructed right now. So the Detroit Pistons, and it doesn't have to be this season, I guess, but if they do want to make that next step towards not just fighting for a play-in spot, but being a playoff team, is going to have to be going for that second star. And it doesn't have to mean trading away Ivy, or it doesn't have to, like, it does mean, though, one of those pieces will have to go. And that's just kind of the nature of the beast. You look at Dallas in Luka's early tenure, they made the trade for Kristaps. Celtics drafted Jason Tatum and Kyrie Irving and Gordon Hayward were soon to follow, right? Like they still had Jaylen Brown and Jason Tatum, but they had all these moving pieces. And De'Aaron Fox, even like to a lesser extent, they went out and got Domantas Sabonis for him. Trae Young, they got DeJounte Murray. Those are the types of moves, and not all of them worked, to be fair, but
Mhm.
those are the types of moves you kind of have to make when you have a player on that type of caliber when you're trying to make that next step, and especially considering that his rookie contract is up this year. This is the last year of that deal, and this is the last year where you'll kind of have that flexibility without his extension coming into play. So I think that if they do make a move, it would be a good time as they do have some more flexibility than they will. Not saying they're going to be hard capped or anything like that, but it will be a little more difficult to make those types of moves going forward. And I feel like Brandon Ingram does fit the mold of second star on this team that they can rely on in moments where, like Cade isn't having an offensive night that he was having last night, where it's 29, 10, and 15. You need someone to rely on, and it's not saying that can't be Ivy or that Ivy would be involved in a trade like this, but it is saying that like maybe Ivy gets bumped to 3 on that totem pole, which I think is more comfortable for him right now as his game is currently constructed. Just because I don't think last year was a year of development gone, right? Like that's
Mhm.
a year that you can say was wasted development. It's not his fault. But at the same time, if you're trying to win games and if that's your priority, you can't rely on someone who's not really found out how to win games yet or how to, score in important games yet. So I think Brandon Ingram does fit that mold. And I think like the offensive creation that he comes with is hard to replicate.
Yeah, and I know his name has been floated around probably since this past summer, just because of the New Orleans connection, obviously, with Trajan Langdon and Michael Blackstone and others, which I understand. My only thing with Ingram is I know the price is going to be expensive. There was a report this week from Jake Fisher that he's looking to get paid 40 million annually, which is a lot. Not saying he isn't worth it, but to your point, you had mentioned Cade Cunningham's, rookie max extension will go into effect next season. Do you really want to have a team that's spending close to $90 million on 2 players? Um, I know eventually, to your point, like they have to go and try to get a 20-point per game scorer next to him. To me, I would probably try to get him more of a secondary ball handler next to him, kind of like how Houston did with Fred VanVleet. I think that's the type of player that Cade personally needs, where he doesn't really have to have the ball in his hands 100% of the time. And if he goes to the bench, you don't have to just kind of hold your breath and hoping that they can, keep a lead. Because last night, like that was kind of like the case. Like when he went to the bench, they were up 16. The lead went down to like 4 in the third quarter. Um, I think with this list, I can understand a Schroeder to an extent. I can understand a Malcolm Brogdon to an extent, but I think it would have to be a tier above that. Um, Kind of like how Dallas traded for Kyrie Irving. I think that would be not saying that like go get Kyrie Irving, even though he's a free agent this summer. I don't know if he wants to come to Detroit, but hey, you never know. Um, I think for me, when I look at Cade's game and I look at Ingram's game, not saying it couldn't work, but I think you need a little bit more help in the backcourt. And I know they have Jaden Ivey. I like Jaden Ivey a lot. I think he's taken huge steps in development and progression this season, but I don't really know if a Brandon Ingram can really elevate this team from, let's say, like they're a playing team this year to maybe a top 5 seed. I mean, am I crazy to think that?
No, I mean, I don't think Brandon Ingram is like it wouldn't be like trading for like prime Paul George, right? Like it wouldn't be like the OKC Indiana type of thing. It would be more just like adding that extra help. Now it's expensive help, like you mentioned, and I don't know if he is 100% the best fit, nor do I know if he would even be a great fit for the type of team that JB seems to want. However, of the 3 available, I do feel like he does fit that more, and I do also think he is more of a playmaker than he gets credit for. There's a lot of times where he was running point throughout the last couple of seasons. And I think that is a really valuable skill that, when you talk about like having the ball come off of Cade's hands a little more, like that's something that, he's able to take the responsibility for. So I know Brandon Ingram is a flawed player. Like he's not the next Kevin Durant like he was built to be. Nor is he like a perennial all-star. But does he have seasons where I do think he can be an all-star? Absolutely. And right now, like there's no player like that, really. Like it's Ivy and gap, like considerable gap. Like Ivy, yes, has that potential, but for me, the thing Ivy really needs to figure out is how to put it together for, more than just a few games at a time. Everybody's going to have off games here and there, but when you're having a stretch of 11 point, 13 point, 14 point games, where the impact is not as tangible, that's not an indictment on him, but that's also not a second option on a good team right now. Not saying he can't be, again, because I know a lot of times when you say something about Ivy, because he has a lot of fans in this fan base, including me. But I don't think he's ready to have that type of role yet. And I think that also plays a part in the turnovers. And I think that's a lot of pressure to put on him. And I don't know if he's 100% ready for it yet.
I just kind of want to follow up with your Ivy stuff because I know the last time you were on a podcast, you got branded as a Jaden Ivey hater, which was wild to me because he didn't really say anything out of bounds. What you said of him, like maybe not being ready to be a second option, that's okay. I don't expect him to go into, what is this, his third season, being able to average 20 points a game. If he can, cool. I think he's like around 18, maybe. But to your point, it's a consistency thing with him. And I think over time throughout the season, he'll understand that for him to impact winning with this team, he's going to have to be a little bit more consistent. I do think this year overall, from this season to last season, huge steps in development. And I'm very happy and excited that he has a coach that actually wants to play him and not have him off the bench and getting DNPs for whatever reason. But I think overall, kind of just to wrap up this topic, Pistons do need another 20 point per game score, in my personal opinion. I don't know where it's going to come from. Maybe it'll be in free agency. Maybe you go and get a stretch five. Maybe you look to get more help at small forward. I don't really know. But to your point, I think the time is ticking because that rookie. What's that?
Do you think a Zach LaVine fits this team?
It does, but the contract doesn't.
Yes. However, there's only 2 more years on that deal. I have been looking at that in terms of just, options for the Pistons moving forward. And again, that's not a deal that has to replace Jaden Ivey at all. That's just I think they need a dynamic scorer in that starting lineup pretty badly. Tobias thus far has been serviceable, but he hasn't given you the 17, 18, or 19 points per game that a good year in Philadelphia or the Clippers or even the Pistons before that kind of look like. And to me, that's why you gave Tobias Harris $25 million. Not obviously to say that he hasn't had any impact, because I'm sure, culturally in the locker room, he makes a big difference. A lot of the guys seem to look to him for leadership, but on the court, Tobias isn't really, I don't think this is crazy to say, I don't think he's much of an upgrade over like a Bojan. Like he plays a different game where he can put his back to the basket more than Bojan did, or drive to the basket more than he did. But in terms of impact, I can't necessarily say like there's been a huge step up in terms of production. And I feel like that's something that, they're really missing. And I think Malik Beasley does an incredible job of being that offensive punch for them. The minutes he's been getting, he's been maximizing. And I think he's been like the shooter for them, like by far. Mm-hmm. But I really do feel like with a dynamic scorer like a Zach LaVine in the lineup, it would add a lot. And I think he complements Cade's game offensively so well. Not to say I think he's the savior or the answer to, their issues or anything like that, but I do think it's worth a look.
Yeah, I think he's definitely a player that makes a lot of sense on paper. The track record, obviously, you can kind of look to his Minnesota days. You can look to his Chicago days. They haven't done a whole lot of winning, and I don't know if you can really point to him for the reason why they haven't done a whole lot of winning. I mean, when Lonzo Ball was healthy and that whole Bulls team was clicking, they were one of the better Eastern Conference teams, but that was a few years ago, and a lot of people had them as just like an Eastern Conference favorite. Um, to kind of get to you like the Tobias Harris thing, Tobias Harris thing. Wow, say that 3 times fast. I think in terms of Boyan, the only difference I've seen with him is defensively, he's not a traffic cone.
True.
And he rebounds. I think this year he's done a really good job at rebounding the basketball. And that's kind of been like, it's kind of funny for me to say it's been a weakness because they're kind of one of the better rebounding teams in the NBA. But there are times where they just kind of look and the other team gets an offensive rebound. Like our defensive rebounding at times have just been absolutely atrocious.
Yeah, it's specifically the whole, my goodness, the defensive rebounding that really has been a struggle. And I look at that Charlotte game a couple weeks ago as an example. Like that was a game where Musa Diabate was putting up career numbers on the boards, and you're just kind of looking at yourself like, what is going wrong here? Because like, much respect to Musa Diabate, but he should not be putting up career numbers against, the Detroit Pistons as a team that's slated to be a pretty good rebounding team.
Yeah, it's really puzzling when you kind of look at the numbers of them being a pretty good rebounding team in the NBA, and then you watch games like the Houston game, the Raptors game, when Jokic Pirtle just went absolutely like crazy, like prime Pirtle, like 20 rebounds. Like,
Yeah.
oh, this is like, man, they're gonna get a first round pick to trade him again. Like, holy crap! Like
The revolving door of Jakob Pirtle.
I'm telling you, man. Like he was definitely a player that I was kind of surprised that he was still in Toronto. But I want to transition into a guy that we've talked about several times on this podcast, and this might kind of feel like just a reused topic, but I promise you it's not. So Isaiah Stewart apparently will be available on the trade market. This actually does come from Michael Scotto of Hoops Hype, who is an NBA insider, so it is pretty reliable information. So Zar, feel like we've talked about this for maybe the past 2 years. What are your thoughts on this report that he may be available in the trade market? And do you think if the Pistons are offered something pretty decent, would they be willing to move him?
I've talked about like, untouchables on this team and everything like that, and how there really is no untouchable on a team that's not a contender. And I really only believe there's a few true untouchables in the NBA, but in terms of what the Detroit Pistons are currently, I don't feel like Isaiah Stewart should be someone that, they ever really consider trading. And I've said this a few times now, but I really do feel like his presence is irreplaceable on this team. It's something that, one, on the basketball court, the minute he checks in, it's, evident that like the pace of the game changes. There is not a single player on this team that plays nearly as hard as Isaiah Stewart. Crashes the boards, your defensive anchor, really. Like, and he's able to provide spacing on offense. It hasn't been as much this season because they haven't used him in the 5-out scenario as much, but that's something that they do have the option to do. He's able to play make from the paint. I feel like there's not much you can ask of Isaiah Stewart that he can't do. And also, I can swear, right?
Yeah.
He's just a fucking dog. Like that's really just what it is. He's like on the court. There's literally not a single player on an opposing team that can ever move Isaiah Stewart. Like, he is an actual culture setter, and those are things that you can't replace. I think if the Pistons have 3 players that they cannot replace on this team, it is Cade Cunningham, it is Isaiah Stewart, and it is Asar Thompson. Those are 3 presences that absolutely cannot be replaced just because of how much they bring to this team. I feel as if Isaiah Stewart, if he were to be traded, it would be the very first big mistake of the Trajan Langdon era. And also, if I will add my own reporting onto this, I don't believe the Pistons will look to trade Isaiah Stewart this trade season. I don't see them really making much in terms of trade movement this season as well. I think this is a team that Trajan Langdon constructed that he wants to see how far they can go before really identifying what pieces, stay and what pieces go. Not to say they won't make any moves, but I don't expect them to move. And I would consider Isaiah to be a core piece of this team. I don't expect them to really move any core pieces anytime soon. If and when that does happen, it will be in the off season. But I think this is a team that if they do make moves at the deadline, it'll be pretty marginal. Especially considering the success this team has had overall. They're not perfect, and they're not, in my opinion, they're not as good as they could be, but they have exceeded most fans' expectations early on, and they're playing competitive basketball, which was ultimately the goal. And I know they want to see internal development. So I don't believe Isaiah Stewart will be traded. And if he was, I do believe that would be a huge mistake.
Yeah, I think if they were to trade him, his presence immediately would be missed. There have been so many times this season where Jalen Duren hasn't really brought it defensively to the point where JB has the luxury of telling Stu, like, hey, can you, go bring some energy, give us some focus, box out. And I don't really expect, players to be locked in for a full 82 games, but I feel like every year we get a report from national reporters that the Detroit Pistons get trade offers for Isaiah Stewart all the time. And I think that says more about Stu as a player versus what the Pistons could possibly get. The fact that you've had contenders over the years like the OKCs, the Bostons, even Miami's to an extent, from what I've heard, they value him as a player. And I think, to your point, he's such a culture setter. He was from a previous regime. Obviously, we're still paying for the draft pick protections. That's a whole other story for a whole other day. But he's one of your better defenders, one of your better rim protectors. Like, I just saw a stat that he's tied with Jonathan Isaac with 30 blocks off the bench. Like, that's a wild stat. Like 30 block shots in the first 25 games. He's having a career year from just blocking shots. I think trading him would be a mistake if the return isn't good, but I don't really know what his trade market is. I don't know if it's a first. I don't know if it's a rotational player, maybe a mid-level starter. But if you do trade him, you better get someone of equal value or maybe a little bit better, in my opinion, anyways.
Yeah, and also to add on to the reporting element of it, I believe Michael said that there are NBA executives who expect Isaiah Stewart to be available, and this is a tip in media for a lot of the viewers. When verbiage like expect and NBA executives expect, it means it is not from the Detroit Pistons or sources within the Detroit Pistons themselves. So again, that's just something I look at. Not to say, obviously, he's a very credible reporter and everything like that.
Mhm.
It's just to say that other executives across the league would expect him to be available. That doesn't mean the Detroit Pistons are making him available. And
Yeah.
I do think in terms of return, yes, you would want a really good return for Isaiah Stewart, and ideally, if that ever were to happen, he would have to be like, in a package that we talk about stars, like that would get you one back. Because I don't think Isaiah Stewart for a first round pick is really moving the needle much for this team. And it's just because he's one of those players that I really feel like can't be replaced. I mean, you look at like a Malik Beasley, right? Like the culture buy-in that he has had thus far is something that, obviously the shooting has been lights out and has become a top 100 shooter as a Detroit Piston of all time. But it's the fact that he buys into this team and, that they have this type of culture that like he can identify with, and you can tangibly see the impact that he's had. I think Stewart is one of those players, but he's also a kind of a pillar of that culture. Um, I I really enjoyed watching Bruce Brown in Detroit. I think he is one of those types of culture guys that, really makes or breaks a team. Like, you know, I didn't think he really got the opportunity to showcase that in Detroit, but since he left Denver, you can tangibly see the impact that he has had, um, as his absence is really, really missed there. I look at a Dorian Finney-Smith in Dallas, when we talk about culture, like, those are the types of players. I mean, granted, Dallas did go to the finals last year, but they didn't win, right? Like, those are the type of play, and they're still looking to trade for him also. That's also another thing. But again, players that just can't really be replaced. And I feel like Stewart is one of those players you just kind of have to keep around. And this is one of the things that, Troy Weaver said a lot of things, but one of the things I think he said that was most accurate was when you talk about Detroit Pistons basketball and what that's supposed to look like, it starts and stops with Isaiah Stewart. And I believe that's really accurate.
Yeah, I feel like we talk about this at least every, as we get closer to the trade deadline since he's been here. We're going 4 years on this now that, executives believe teams have offered. Wouldn't surprise me over the next 2 months if you start hearing like possible packages that the Detroit Pistons got offered for Isaiah Stewart because he's just a valuable player, in my opinion.
Yeah, absolutely. Like, I feel like that's why he, like you said, like that's why he gets, the offers and interest that he does across the league.
Yeah. There's one more reporting from Michael Scotto, and it was Paul Reed. And in his article, he said that Paul Reed could be added in some trades for salary filler. Now, I kind of want to switch the question around because I've had such a hard time understanding why Paul Reed was added to this roster. Now, I get that you want to carry three centers. I get that. The playing time makes no fucking sense. Like I don't understand it. Like at times when maybe we're on a back-to-back, he barely gets any burn. They always talk about, him being one of those key veterans. Like the Charlotte Hornets game when they were in Charlotte and they lost on a tip-in. I mean, he had like 7 points during that stretch in the fourth quarter, and he looked really good. I mean, am I missing something? Is like Paul Reed a good basketball player, or maybe I'm tripping a little bit?
B-ball Paul is definitely a valuable basketball player. I I don't I don't think he was brought in to have minutes when Isaiah Stewart and Jalen Duren are both healthy. I think he was brought in to be a contingency plan for if and when neither or one of those two are not healthy, because both players have had missed quite a few games within the last few seasons. Duren with the ankle injuries, and then Isaiah Stewart has had just kind of, spontaneous injuries that have taken him out typically towards the end of the season. So you can always say, like, maybe he could have came back if they were playing, basketball that meant anything besides what pick they're getting. But you know, again, he has missed time. And I think Paul Reed, his role on this team was to just be there and be able to provide kind of there's a term that Jamil McMillan, Motor City Cruise head coach, uses. He says, basketball Swiss Army knife, right? Like that's kind of the role that you kind of have to have Paul Reed play when he does get minutes. With that being said, I 100% do think he was acquired by the Detroit Pistons to ultimately be moved in a trade. The contract, when you look at the CBA and how things are constructed right now, the contract is able to match, some salary dumps, and it's able to be one of those ones that are used in terms of salary filler and, taking on deals that maybe may not be favorable for another team, or, like a team that needs a big, but like, there's just a lot of situations where you can plug in a Paul Reed to a deal, and not saying he's going to get you like a first round pick or anything like that, but to be used in a trade that gets you some sort of asset back. And I do ultimately think that is why Trajan Langton and JB, or I'm sorry, not JB, Michael Blackstone and J.R. Holden, I believe, of the Pistons front office. These are all like very, very smart basketball minds, and every single move they make is extremely calculated. And I can't help but say there was a reason they took on this contract in the summer. And yes, it is to be a contingency plan if Isaiah Stewart and Jalen Duren are not healthy, but it is also to be kind of an option in terms of the trade market. And when I talk about, marginal moves, this would be one of those. Like, I don't expect them to, go out and make a Jaden Ivey for like, I don't know. I don't even expect a Zach LaVine or a Brandon Ingram to walk through the doors this season. But I like he's not to be used for a deal like that. It's to be used for a marginal deal.
Yeah, I mean, maybe. Well, we're going to talk about a backup point guard in the next segment that just currently got waived. But I've just been really puzzled because I know he can play. I know he can give you good minutes, can stretch the floor. I think he's done pretty well in limited time in just the DHO sets. Um, but I feel like some of he's got really good highlights, but he also has like really good lowlights in the same breath. He kind of reminds me of Pokashevsky from a few years ago with OKC. Like some of his highlights to be like on Bleacher Report, but his lowlights would be on Shaqtin' a Fool. Like that's what I kind of think when I watch Paul Reed at times. But I've just been really puzzled. If that was their plan, cool. But I mean, I don't really think it was like really directed to the fans that, hey, we just picked up this guy because you never know at the trading deadline. We could flip him for an asset, flip him for maybe a 7-foot center or a veteran backup point guard. I don't think they really kind of told the fans like what they were going to do because he was on waivers. They picked him up and they're like, screw it. Who cares?
Yeah, I mean, it's not something I also expect them to come out and be like, hey, yeah, we picked up this guy so we can trade him. And I don't even like it's also not a guarantee that he gets moved, but of the players on the Detroit Pistons, I would say he is the most likely to get dealt this trade season. And it's because of the contract and because when you pick up someone off of waivers, typically it's around like the $1 to $4 million range. I believe his contract's 7.68. If I can go off the top of my head, you can let me know if I got that right. But he's just a guy that can get you probably a second round pick back. And this is a team that is not very heavy on second round picks, which the new CBA I feel like deserves to get talked about a little bit more just because of how much it affects the value of things. And second round picks now are a lot more valuable than they used to be. And whether the NBA has realized that yet or not is, up to whatever front office is, is the one you're talking to. But over time, I do expect second round picks to have more value and to be coveted a little more. And the Pistons, I think, need to stockpile back on some of those.
Yeah, no, Trajan got a pretty good second round pick for just taking on Tim Hardaway Jr.'s contract. It's going to be Toronto's second. Yeah. So that's pretty exciting. And if you're a Piston fan, you should be praying for Toronto's downfall because the worse they do, the higher that pick will be. But I probably shouldn't say that. Karma, watch us go on a losing streak because I said
all of a sudden they go on a play-in push.
Yeah, and if that does happen, you guys can blame me. I did want to talk about this player. He played for New Orleans, obviously, and that's Elfrid Payton. And I saw a lot of Pistons fans this past week talk about him. Obviously, he's been in the league for quite some time. I was very shocked to see that he's already 30. He had a 14 points, 20 assist game. So, my question is, they have an available roster spot. I'm sure you've talked with fans or even your friends about the backup point guard debates. Do you think he would be a good fit with the Detroit Pistons?
Yeah, absolutely. He would be a JB. He would be loved by JB like immediately just because of the defensive presence that he has, and then also his ability to take care of the basketball. Two very important things, and two things this team does not have a lot of. I think he'd be a great shout for a third point guard on this team, and to take some minutes when an Ivy gets in foul trouble, or Cade and Ivy are in foul trouble, or one of them is injured. Knock on wood, they're not, but in those scenarios, I think Elfrid Payton would be great for the Detroit Pistons, and I think he'd be a good fit culturally as well. Um, do I think he's going to be a difference maker? Like if they sign him, no, not necessarily. And I think the third point guard thing is something that I've changed my mind on a few times just because of how well it's gone for them thus far with Cade and Ivy. And though they have had some times this season where the ball doesn't get handled very well, or one of them is in foul trouble, Cade missed a couple games due to injury. Overall, it's not been a thing where I feel as if they can find more minutes in the rotation for another point guard. Like in my opinion, I think Marcus Sasser has had a great season thus far. He's had really limited minutes, and I thought he's actually, and I've been someone who's been an advocate of his game, but I've also been one to say I don't believe he's a point guard, right? Like I believe Marcus Sasser is a scoring guard. With that being said, I think he's actually not done bad in the point guard minutes he's gotten thus far, and I think he might be the answer to those minutes if they do continue to choose to give him them. And I think the offensive scoring that he provides is really, really important. He's been a part of a lot of runs, like him and Stewart.
Mhm.
In terms of energy, those are two really high energy basketball players. And I know Sasser is undersized, and I think he knows that as well because he plays with a level of tenacity and kind of just talk about being a dog. He's kind of a dog on the court. I feel like he's someone that could use a little more looks. If the Pistons don't see that in him, maybe then you talk about trades. Maybe then Marcus Sasser could find minutes elsewhere. I think Koo said this as well. Just because I think he's too talented to be in the position he is right now. And if you want to do something like that and then get an Alfred Payton to take those minutes instead, then that makes sense. But as currently constructed right now, it's like when a player like Marcus Sasser is not even cracking the rotation, Alfred Payton is a great break in case of emergency type of player. But I think you would want to find some minutes for him on the team, and I don't know if that's possible right now.
Yeah, even if like he doesn't get minutes, but just kind of being like a secondary voice, kind of like what Taj Gibson did last year, where Taj wasn't playing a whole lot, but it's just another veteran voice because he's been around the NBA for quite some time. He's played for multiple teams. I think him as just a facilitator, definitely in the half court, I think would really help this team. But I get your point with Sasser because in limited minutes this year, he has produced. I thought the Milwaukee game, he did a really good job. The Boston game, I thought he was a very big reason why they got back into that game. Just the way he was defending Peyton Pritchard, like really taking a challenge of just like locking up, primary ball handlers when he is out there. We don't really know what the long-term plans are for him. If maybe Jarrett Jack is working with him to try to be possibly a backup point guard for this team. Maybe that's his long-term future plans for the Pistons. Cool. But to your point, yeah, he's way too talented to get DNPs or only play maybe if someone's not bringing the energy on a night-to-night basis. It's a guy that you traded up for, first round pick. Flirted with a 50, 40, 90 season in his rookie year, which is really, really hard to do as a rookie. But I know you've said multiple times he's a bucket. He's a score first guard. And I still think that to be the case. But I mean, if he can, develop setting up, the offense, I could be more patient with his development in that aspect. But did want to kind of ask you the question because I feel like the backup point guard question has definitely been one where if I have to talk about it one more time, I'm going to punch a wall because it's just been like so. I don't even know. Like I swear, every post game podcast I do, we need a backup point guard. We need a backup point guard.
No, it needs to be addressed, and like there needs to be a viable answer for it. It's just who it is really is the question.
Yeah, I mean, like we talked about, like if you were to get a Malcolm Brogdon, for example, like obviously that's a clear upgrade as a backup, and I think he's a player that could actually like really help Cade Cunningham because they kind of play similar. But I mean, like maybe if you get a guy like that coming into a building that has played for good teams like Boston, He's on a rebuilding team right now. Maybe he doesn't really care if he doesn't get, playing time all the time, but he could be a vet to help the young guards like Jaden Ivey, Marcus Sasser, and Cade Cunningham.
Absolutely.
But again, you never really know with that last roster spot what we're going to do with it. We could just not fill it at all, and we drove ourselves crazy for a whole year. So this next topic, I'm sure a lot of people have seen it. ESPN made a list, and it's their top 25 under 25. Now, I actually made this graphic in Photoshop, and it actually took me probably an hour just to make from scratch. But
Impressive work.
I want to put it on the screen for people that are watching, so you don't have to pay a ESPN Plus subscription. Doing God's work over here for you guys. But what did you kind of think of this list, and what are your thoughts on where Cade Cunningham is currently listed in their list?
I think Franz Wagner has had an incredible season, played incredible basketball. I cannot say anywhere from 12 to 3. Any of those basketball players are significantly better than Cade Cunningham, if even marginally better than Cade Cunningham. I don't believe a Jalen Williams would survive in a situation that Cade Cunningham, finds himself in or found himself in. I think this season, objectively, Cade Cunningham has been better than Tyrese Halliburton. I think Halliburton, if we're strictly going off of this season, Halliburton should be probably where Cade is, and LaMelo and Cade should be ahead of him, just because he's not had a very good season whatsoever. Alperen Şengün, I think he's great. Like, this is a thing. Like, I do feel as if Cade Cunningham should be in that top 5, 100%. But I can't really come on here and say like, oh, well, these players don't deserve to be there either, because Evan Mobley has been incredible this season. Franz Wagner also been incredible this season. Alperen Şengün has been great last season and this season. I noticed that I'm not number 20, but it's okay. But it's no, I'm just saying it's a thing where I'm like, I understand why these players get placed where they do. I just feel like there's going to come a point where Cade Cunningham is undeniably top 5 under 25. And there will come a point where Cade Cunningham is undeniably a top 15 player in the NBA. You could argue that he's already close to the top 15 right now, if you believe he's making his all-star candidacy. I can't help but feel, I look at this list and I can't help but feel just disappointed. Like, if Cade Cunningham was given any semblance of a actual basketball roster in 2023, granted, he played in like 10 games in 2022, like in his rookie year, like the conversations about his career right now would be so different, because you can't look at me in the eyes and tell me that a Paulo Banchero or a Franz Wagner are objectively better basketball players than Cade Cunningham. I would argue that Cade Cunningham is better than both of them. It's just situational. I love Paulo, one of my favorite players in the league, but I can't say that he's better than Cade. I just feel as if Cade right now is an elite talent that has had probably the worst circumstances you could have as a young prospect, because circumstances play a huge role in development, and they also play a huge role in perception. Scotty Barnes, been great, right? I don't think if he had the team that he has, this year, the last few years, like those years he had with OG, those years he had with Pascal, playing, with like the Raptors teams that actually played meaningful basketball, is part of the reason why he can survive a bad team that he's on right now. Like, that's the reason that he continues to develop right now, because I can tell you, I don't think Scotty Barnes would be in the position he's in right now, where though his team is bad, he continues to develop and look better and better. I don't think he'd be in that position if the Raptors didn't prioritize his development and prioritize putting together a team that made basketball sense the first couple of years. So it disappoints me, man. I really want to see Cade in the top 5 of these discussions, and honestly, top 3.
Well, let's do this. Give me your top 5. Like you reorder it right now.
Okay. Victor Wembanyama, I feel like is just objectively 1.
Okay.
Although I don't believe he has been the best player on this list thus far, it's you can't take anybody over him. Like that's come on. I would keep Anthony Edwards at number 2. That's again, like, a Western Conference Finals run last season. In my opinion, top 2 shooting guard in the NBA right now. And then 3, I would go Cade Cunningham. I just feel as if the impact Cade Cunningham has on a basketball team where I don't think anybody else, maybe outside of, Tyrese Halliburton, has had to inherit the responsibility of truly being the guy on their team. The Magic are a group that plays great basketball, but they have so many pieces that they have survived Paolo Banchero being injured. Like, up until, Franz just getting injured, they've survived because they're a very well-built team. Like I can't say that the the Pistons, if Cade got injured with that groin injury like a week or 2 ago, and he missed significant time, this team would not have 10 wins right now.
Mm-mm.
Like I could not tell you where this team would be right now. And that's just a thing of like he's so valuable to this team that he is legitimately playing as their number 1 option, and a number 1 option that has to lead a team of other young players. Like it's not like the Orlando Magic where they're this kind of system that builds off of each other. Like everything runs through Cade on this team. They live and die by Cade Cunningham. Even though the roster has gotten better, this is still a team that lives and dies by Cade Cunningham. That's easily to me why he's number 3, and that's why Victor Wembanyama, Anthony Edwards, and Cade Cunningham are those solidified top 3, because they're the only 3 that can really say they're the franchise guys, in my opinion. 4, I would go Tyrese Maxey. I know his season this year hasn't been as great as it has been before, but like to me, I feel like he's one of the best offensive players in the league, and I would put Paulo at 5 behind him. Franz also at 6. I would put Mobley at 7. I'll give you the top 10 because I guess I won't go through the whole 25, but Mobley at 7, Chet at 8. I would keep Jalen Williams at 9, and I would put LaMelo Ball at 10. And for what counts, I would say Scotty Barnes would still be 11, and I would put probably Brandon Miller at 12.
Yeah, my top 5. I was thinking about this today. It's completely different from yours. Like I had Anthony Edwards 1 because it's just like how highly I think of Anthony Edwards, because to me, I feel like if he wasn't on the Timberwolves, this would be a lottery team at the end of the day. They would be in the Cooper Flag sweepstakes. He's just such a leader, a force. I think in a few years, he's probably going to be in MVP conversations if he already isn't right now, just the way he's playing. I got Vic too, just because of his impact and potential, being so young. I got Cade 3 personally. I'm with you with the Cade 3. But my 4 and 5s are a little different. I got LaMelo 4 because the type of season he's having right now, obviously the Hornets aren't winning basketball games, but just his impact, the Hornets are a completely different team when he's not out there. Just the type of games that he's had this year. I mean, we've seen him a couple times. Like there was nothing we could do to guard him. He was hitting shots from like midcourt, just taking over the game. In number 5, I'm probably going to go Tyrese Maxey, just because obviously the Philly situation this season has been just an absolute circus. They're starting to put more games together. They're starting to get back on track. I think they just won their 6th game of the season. So they're starting to gel a little bit. But I just think Tyrese Maxey as a player, this is a guy that could easily average 30 points a game if he wanted to, and distribute and help his team win basketball games.
I would, for what it's worth, I would put Jared McCain on this top 25 list as well. The type of rookie season he's having right now is unreal. And I'm not just saying this because Jarrett Jack once mistook me for Jared McCain. I genuinely do believe he has the potential to be one of the players in the top 15 of these discussions a year from now.
Yeah, it's kind of funny you said Jared McCain because we have a Detroit Pistons group chat on the Bunches app, and there's this one guy Manny in there that like he called like Jared McCain like being like a really good player, and man, like people in that group chat just troll him for liking Jared McCain with all the like the TikTok antics and like the painting his nails. Like every time I hear his name, I just laugh because those guys in our group chat are just so vicious when you even mention his name. But I agree with you. He's having a really good rookie campaign, and if the season ended today, he's probably the rookie of the year.
Easily. And I like easily the rookie of the year. I did think he was being undervalued coming into the draft. I think people kind of wrote him off because of his height. And they wrote him off because of everything that's extracurricular, which made no sense to me because it's not like he's a distraction or anything like that. He just is a 19-year-old in 2024. Like, I think people are having a hard time realizing that like young people just move differently than they used to. Um, and I if anything, like it to me showed that like he's unwilling to change who he is, and is confident in himself. And I think that's a huge thing. And I think that's honestly like part of the reason he's able to make that transition to the NBA so seamlessly.
Yeah, it's wild that Jared Jack called you Jared McCain though.
Oh man, yeah. I mean, it's like it's probably harder to see with the hair now, but and all truthfulness, if we're talking, because every time I do a podcast or show my face on the internet, I get called Frank Jackson or Jalen Green or whatever. I don't think I look like Jalen Green. In all truthfulness, like I really don't. I kind of maybe see the Frank Jackson one. The only one I really do see is Jared McCain. That's like the only one I was like, okay, I can actually see that. But it keeps the interactions coming, so I don't mind it. Whatever NBA player you think I look like in the comments.
Full transparency, when I was making this ESPN graphic, I happened to be making the graphic at my mom's house, and I was resizing Jalen Williams, and my mom goes, "Hey, it looks like Czar." I'm like, "Oh my god, oh my god!" Like really? I was like I was like, it's just because his hair was like really big.
Yeah, it's just the hair. It's
I think
really what it is.
I think the last podcast that she saw that you were on, you kind of had like the hair just like flowing, just like luscious
Yeah.
locks out there. I was like, man, another player. Come on, man.
Yeah.
We Zariq's fine. He's a Jalen Gabriel. Stop the cat.
I plead the fifth.
Oh man, that's funny. We have one more topic, and then we can kind of wrap this podcast up because I know you have some stuff to do. So earlier this week, I think it was immediately after the Celtics game, during JB's press conference, he had mentioned that starting is a privilege. So obviously, the starting lineup this year, there have been ups and downs with it. If you did have to make one change to it, what would it be, and which player would you substitute into the starting lineup?
Pretty easy for me. It's Jalen Duren and Isaiah Stewart. I feel like, and I was talking with Koo about this. There is a question of, if Isaiah Stewart's really thriving in this bench role, do you want to risk, changing that? Yes, I think you do. Because I do believe in one of the games, he started when Duren was out, and I thought the impact was just about the same. And I feel as if Jalen Duren right now, he provides vertical spacing and he can be a roll man. That's about it on offense. You don't really want the ball in his hands in terms of playmaking, which has been actually a pro for him, in years before. Not really so much this year. He's had quite a few costly turnovers. Feels as if he's being more careless with the basketball. Sometimes feel as if he gets a little bit of tunnel vision or trying to make too many flashy passes. And then I think more than anything, the issue with Jalen Duren thus far has been effort. We talk about the concern about his ankles and things like that when it came to his defense last year, but This year there is no reported ankle injuries. He seems to be fine. He just doesn't seem to play every single possession the exact same way. Um, it's to be expected, man. Like, he's young and he just turned 21. He's incredibly young, and starting is a privilege. And I really do feel as if him kind of having to readjust coming from the bench, it shouldn't be looked at as like a demotion, and it shouldn't be looked at as like the Pistons are giving up on Jalen Duren, because I don't think that's what it is. And if that does happen, it's not what it like. That's not at all what it is. I really feel like it is prove it. Like, you've been given the keys to be kind of the franchise center thus far. Right now, you're not playing like it, and if it's a thing where you're missing shots, or you make mistakes here and there, I don't think that's anything that's like, okay, we got to move you to the bench. To me, it's the effort, and when you're young, effort cannot be an issue. And I think it was Brian Scalabrine that mentioned this on the Celtics broadcast a few nights ago. You just can't be young and lacking manpower against stronger teams like a Boston, and also lack in terms of effort. If you're going to be a young, scrappy team, you got to punch dudes in the fucking mouth. Like, that's really what it is. Like, Jalen Duren is someone that has all the physical tools, and he is genuinely a gifted basketball player. He really just needs to put it together, like, in terms of the mental aspect of the game. And I don't know what it is for him. Like, I don't know what that missing piece is, but if it takes kind of just like a push in terms of, hey, we're putting you on the bench, and he has to be the energy guy on this team. I think that maybe gets you to putting Jalen Duren back in the starting lineup towards the end of the season. And I also think Isaiah Stewart has earned a starting position for the time being, because he's played his ass off. He's been an incredible defender. Offensively, he's done pretty much everything he can. I think talk about culture, like, that's always been a thing for him. And I also just feel as if he gives other teams a very hard time, and that's hard to replicate. And when he comes in, I forgot the stat, but I believe their net rating is about 6 or 7 points higher when Isaiah Stewart is on the court versus off. Objectively, he is the better player right now, and as a result, I don't believe he should be coming off the bench, and I don't think you should be in a position where you need to make up for a deficit, or make up for the lacks, or for the lapses that Duren has. Duren kind of has to be in a position moving forward where he comes in and he cleans up, and he has to be the energy guy, and he has to try in the defensive possessions that he gets. And I also think that, in all honesty, like, when you're coming off the bench, you're probably not guarding the other team's best center right out the gate. Maybe that helps build defensive reps, because every night he's guarding, whether it be a Kristaps Porzingis, or whether it be he didn't play last night, but a Karl Anthony Towns, like, maybe he needs to take a second and readjust on defense. And maybe that means guarding, the second unit's bench bigs versus the first units. Whatever it is, I do feel as if that's a move that really needs to happen sooner than later.
I was talking with Mike from Driving to the Basket. I was on his podcast this week. We're talking about Duren. We talked about him for like 15 minutes. And something I told him was, like, when Dwayne Casey was here, Duren didn't automatically start. If you remember, Isaiah Stewart was starting for probably the first 30 or so games, until Dwayne kind of gave him the keys to start. And, like, during his rookie year, obviously he was giving effort, communicating, wasn't blocking shots, but he was bothering shots. I thought last year's he developed so much bad habits under Monty Williams defensively, where there were no repercussions if he missed an assignment, if he missed the closeout, if he wasn't protecting the rim. They kind of just let him do whatever he wanted. And I think it's kind of carried over to this season under JB Bickerstaff. And I was having conversations about this with, some people. I think Duren is definitely a player that I think I like, but the effort just isn't consistent. Like, the Milwaukee Bucks game, for the first 5 minutes, he was locked in. Like, he was actually, bothering shots. He was blocking shots. He was involved. And then the effort was just gone, like it completely disappeared. Um, and my only thing is like kind of the body language right now. He doesn't seem like he's having a good time. Maybe I'm reading too much into it, but at times it seems like he wants to kind of be like Point Duran, if you will. It seems like he's way more engaged when he does have the basketball in his hands, and when he doesn't, or Kate's not throwing him lobs, he seems really disengaged. And I don't know if it's something where he feels that he should be involved in the offense more, or maybe I'm just reading too much into it. I also saw some people mention Tim Hardaway Jr. for Malik Beasley as a possible swap at small forward. Obviously, when Asar does get healthy, maybe he gets that starting small forward spot. I don't know. I think, Asar's maybe another 2-3 weeks until like his conditioning is back up, and he's got to come back from an injury that he just suffered, which I didn't even know he had an injury until yesterday's game. But I do agree with you with your Jalen Duren assessment.
Yeah, and I do think Asar making a move into the starting lineup is probably realistically, I don't think that's something that happens this season. Just because it's going to take him a while to kind of set back into playing full NBA minutes and getting his body more used to that. And I also think that right now this team isn't constructed to replace the spacing because Tim Hardaway, since the injury, hasn't really been the same impact player that he was before, but having the threat of spacing is still really valuable. And
Mhm.
putting Tim Hardaway in that lineup does provide them with spacing. And if you put in a Asar Thompson in that lineup, it automatically kind of hurts. And I know his shot does look better early on this season, but it's not a guarantee that it's going at a respectable rate. And Ivy's shot isn't where it could be, where it's like, okay, like they can survive Cade, Ivy, Asar minutes. And Tobias also hasn't really been as reliable of a 3-point shooter this year. So I really feel as if they can't put Asar in the starting lineup this year, but I do believe eventually that'll be the move. And I was thinking about the Malik Beasley for Tim Hardaway swap. That's also something I think could happen just because of the impact that Malik has had. And I think just having him in there as soon as possible is great for your offense. It's just a matter of, do you get those bench scoring minutes? Is that something that you can really replace? Because we talked about starter minutes versus bench minutes. I think Malik plays like a starter role on this team. He just doesn't happen to be in the starting lineup. But I do believe that is something that's worth looking at for sure.
Yeah, I mean, some people are calling him like the 2024 version of the microwave of like Vinnie Johnson, which is both before our times because I wasn't born in the 80s, and I know you weren't either. But I mean, you can watch highlights. Like Vinnie Johnson was a bucket. I think Malik kind of has that same effect. He had like 12 points in the first quarter, and the Knicks were just like completely shocked.
Yeah, I can't imagine him going anywhere else for a few years now. Like it feels like he's really found a home in Detroit.
Yeah, even after that kid flipped him off because he probably bet on him for his parlay, telling him he
Oh
sucks.
my
Which,
god.
bro, like when
That
I saw
was
that, that was the most Roseville behavior I've ever seen in my life.
yeah, Howell, Michigan. Shout out. Yeah, I don't the betting thing is a whole different discussion because I'll go 20 minutes on that. But I feel as if, okay, here's my thing. Maybe I shouldn't say this, but I'm gonna say it. If you're gonna flip off somebody in the Pistons tunnel, you had 4 years before this. You know what I mean? Like you had 4 years to really, and people would have been mad at you, but it would have been a little more justified. Malik Beasley has been like the second or third best player on this team consistently. The one off night he has, you're gonna give him the bird. I was like, come on, man. Like that's, what are we doing here?
I know. I saw a comment because I had posted the video on Instagram. Someone was like, "Bet you won't flip up Isaiah Stewart." It's like, yeah, he wouldn't have a finger.
Yeah, no.
Do you have time for maybe like one or two questions from people that are watching right now?
Yeah, of course.
Oh, okay. I don't know if you have heard anything or no, but I feel like Bobby Klitman is like one player that a lot of Pistons fans are like really antsy to see. I don't really know if the like JB or maybe the Pistons PR have like really told you guys like what's going on with him or not.
Yeah, so I think it was open practice when I was told about Bobby, and it was initially just like, "Hey, Bobby has a calf contusion and nothing major." However, it turns out that it actually has taken quite some time for him to recover, and I believe they said it's because of fluid in the calf. I don't know where his rehab is right now. I know he's worked with Federico Gallinari quite a few times in pregame, not doing full workouts, but just workouts here and there. Um, Federico's the assistant coach for the Detroit Pistons, their strength and conditioning, and that's about it in terms of what's happening right now. I think realistically, once he does get cleared to play, it's more feasible that he gets minutes for the Motor City Cruise than the Detroit Pistons in the near future. I think he is someone that you're probably not going to see a lot of this season in terms of main roster Detroit Pistons minutes. If you do want to see him, I'm pretty certain he'll get minutes with the Motor City Cruise. And how he does in those, maybe he'll find his way into the Pistons rotation. But also right now, I don't know where exactly he would fit in the Pistons rotation. Um, just because their rotation seems pretty set in stone. So I don't expect him to play Pistons minutes for probably another month or two.
I know he said on his Instagram stories that he said he's getting close. So I really don't know what that means. I had the pleasure of talking to his old coach from Sweden, which was definitely a lot of fun. Um, but man, like he was the talk of summer league. Like just the way he
Yeah.
was shooting the basketball, distributing. I know a lot of fans are like really excited for him to play. I don't know. Maybe he gets back up to Tobias Harris minutes if Simone Fontecchio doesn't start picking it up. Because I mean, like I was really high on Simone. I don't know about you, Zar, but like he has really, really struggled. He did pretty well against the Knicks, but overall throughout the season, he's had quarters where he hits a couple of threes, and then it's just shot looks a little flat this year.
Yeah, Simone is someone that last season I thought was like, I was like, man, if Troy Weaver's going out, he's going out with a bang. Like that was a great trade on his end. But yeah, I really feel as if the foot injury last year is kind of what's been keeping him back. I know he's talked about like, the difficulties of coming back from that because I think he said he only had like maybe a month or less than a month before he really like was cleared in the off season. So he didn't have a healthy off season at all, and a foot injury for a shooter and for someone that plays like him is obviously going to impact your game. And I think that I think he also said that like, the regular season is really just like the first real 5v5 minutes he's gotten in a long time. So I think for him it'll be a readjusting thing. Now, if that continues into like January, February, that's obviously something to watch. But I do feel as if he should start heating up sometime soon here because it's been about like a month or two now of the season where I feel like he should slowly be getting back into that rhythm that he was in last season.
Yeah, I thought it was a foot injury too. I also think giving him the ball with 5 seconds doesn't do him any
He gets a
favors.
lot of grenades. Yeah.
Yeah, it's like 3 seconds, and they're like trying to like throw him a pass like 35 feet away from the basket. And it's just like, hey, do something. I was like, okay, yeah,
Yeah.
that's where we're at. We'll do like one more question because we have some people talking about like some possible like trade pieces. We didn't talk about this player, even though we were talking about the Pelicans. This comes from Corey. Watch it live on Twitter. He said, "How would we feel about CJ McCollum if the asking price is small?"
I'm not feeling it, to be honest with you. I feel as if he is someone who I think is a valuable basketball player for sure, but the contract he's on right now, mixed with the Tobias Harris deal, I don't know if you really can justify that. Now, when he's on and he's playing good minutes, he's great to have, and I think the scoring he provides would be great next to Cade. But being undersized, he's only getting older. He's had dealt with some injuries. I don't feel as if that is a trade that you make right now if you're really trying to set yourself up for the future. Um, Regardless of asking price, I feel as if he can find himself within a year or two being a negative asset.
Yeah, I mean, if I'm thinking like a shooting guards that they can trade for, he doesn't even like enter my mind. Maybe it's just because I'm not that high on him as a player. I know at this stage of his career, he's still impactful, but I don't know, man. Like I thought of Anthony Simons, but then I remember he doesn't play any defense, but he's a bucket.
Yeah, I mean, if you're going all in on offense, that's a good look.
I mean, like I'd love Shaden Sharp next to Cade. Like I absolutely love that. But what happens with Jaden Ivey? Some people have talked about Levine, even though we talked about him earlier. I think Levine on paper probably makes the most sense if you really want to get another like shooting guard next to Cade. I feel like Levine checks so many boxes offensively for this team, and also a guy that can kind of dribble, pass, shoot. But
Yes, exactly.
it,
There is
it,
no perfect trade candidate. Like I feel like that's something Pistons fans specifically get stuck on a lot. And I feel like it's just because of the patience that they've had to have for the last few years. Is like, okay, when we finally make a move, it's got to be for like the perfect guy. But
mhm.
it's not realistic. Like, I'm sorry, Devin Booker is not walking through that door, right? Like, Devin Booker's not walking through the door. Anthony Edwards is not, like, Jaylen Brown isn't coming through. Like, you have to look realistically and understand that players are flawed, and the players that you will go and get realistically will be flawed. Even if Devin Booker is flawed, but you know what I mean? Like, it's just like you can't expect them to just all of a sudden be like, okay, great. Paul George, come on home. You know, like,
Right.
or Devin Booker, Grand Rapids native. Hope you love the Breslin. You'll get to see it a whole lot more soon. Like, it's just that's not happening anytime soon. You got to start somewhere, and I think the Levine contract really isn't that bad, and I think especially because of the time left, um, it won't be that bad, but we'll see.
Yeah, I mean, some people are funny. Rumor has it Killian's available. I'm not getting into that, you guys.
Isn't he on the?
Uh,
I don't even think he's on a standard contract right now.
I think he's with the Long Island Nets, and I don't even think he
Yeah,
starts.
yeah, they waived him before the season started, so I think he's just on a G League deal.
Wow, the fall off. But can't say I'm surprised. I mean, had Corey Woods on here, and you were probably in the same like press conference room, and said Troy said word for word he asked Killian to work on his shooting, and he just didn't do it. He's just like, yeah, he just
Yeah,
didn't
I
do
do
it.
remember that. I do
I
remember
was,
that.
I was like, wow, Troy's going out with a bang. I mean, like
Yeah, man.
that was his pick, and he's just like, yeah, this guy just did not try. But I don't want to keep you on here too long. I know you have stuff to do, but I do want to give you the floor to plug and promote what you do on Twitter, what you're working on, and where people can find you and follow you at.
Yeah, at Zariq Xavier on all of my platforms. I do work for my platform called Bully Ball, which is a sports media outlet. We do Pistons coverage primarily right now. We have Jake, who helped me co-create it a few years ago. He loves doing Tigers, college football. We try to get in as many pockets as we can. I was trying to do some Michigan State coverage. I don't know if that'll happen. We'll see. But overall, just I do as much as I can there. I put out a pretty long piece in the beginning of the season looking at why this season really needs to be different for the Detroit Pistons, which, you know, kind of has aged pretty well so far, if I do say so myself. And then I also do like photos covering the Pistons, writing, you name it. I try to do as much as I can. I started doing videos too. That's going to be a priority for me moving forward, just because how the media landscape is shifting right now. Yeah, that's me. And I appreciate you having me on here as always. It's always a good time.
Oh, it's fun to catch up once a month. You always you bring the energy. You always have. You're very insightful. I'll say you're probably one of the most insightful guests that I do have on, like a recurring guest, and people love having you on. I mean, we have 509 people watching live right now. So, if you guys want to go support Zara, go follow him. All of his links, if you're watching live on YouTube, are in the description below. And so is Real Bully Ball. So you guys can go support them and the type of content that they do put out. But hope you guys had a great weekend. Kind of feels weird the Lions aren't playing today.
Yeah,
But
it does.
I mean,
Doesn't feel
like
like
two
Sunday.
back-to-back Thursday games is just absolutely diabolical by the NFL. But fuck the Packers. See you guys next week. Peace.